between their countries will ensure global security. President Xi said their two countries were upholding international equity and justice. They were meeting as the Russian president hosts this year's BRICS summit. It's the first gathering of the alliance since it expanded beyond the original members, Brazil, Russia, India and China. And the group is positioning itself as a counterweight to the West. Dr. Stuart Patrick is director of the Global Order and Institutions Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That's a Washington, D.C. based think tank. Welcome to DW. And what's BRICS for?
Well, BRICS is largely a counter-hegemonic grouping. Its members are much more articulate about what they stand against and what they oppose than necessarily what they are in favor of. But it's largely an expression of frustration and grievance over the fact that the current international order to its members seems to be made by the West for the West, and that the structures of the global economy, including the hegemony of the U.S. dollar, for instance, are things that need to go, and that there needs to be greater voice and weight for emerging countries.
And let's start there then. That founding aim of reducing the dependence of member economies on the dollar, effectively proofing them against Western sanctions. What progress have they made?
Very little so far. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about creating an alternative BRICS currency, but of course, a lot of the members of the BRICS themselves are loath to replace one currency, for instance, the U.S. dollar, with another currency, for instance, the Chinese renminbi. There has been some movement in advance of something and create a payment system in which BRICS countries could actually, in a digital form, conduct trade with each other without having to use dollar convertibility. But as you say, one of the big efforts here is to reduce the structural ability of the United States in particular to use its dominance of the sinews of the global financial system to be able to punish not only adversaries like Russia, but those that trade with them as well.
Okay, you talked about them being more articulate in what they're against than what they're for. Does this shared antipathy to the West help BRICS countries overcome their beefs with each other? Because you look at the grouping, you see India and China, Egypt and Ethiopia, as well as Iran and Saudi Arabia, who all have issues.
Yeah, this has been the problem with the BRICS from the beginning. There is this ostensible antipathy towards Western domination of things like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and some desire of countries to, for instance, emerging economies like India to become permanent members of the UN Security Council. But the problem is that once you look closer, these countries are riven with all kinds of rivalries. India and China obviously have a big border dispute going on. They are vying as the champion of the global South. The original BRICS members include three very vibrant, if turbulent, democracies in Brazil, India, and South Africa, and at the same time, a group that is vehemently opposed to the West in the part of China and Russia. So even before expansion, there are huge divisions between these groups on a tremendous number of issues.
Okay. So membership currently stands, we'll do the list: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. Tell us about a couple of the big names in the queue to join and what they hope to get out of membership.
Well, certainly, I think Iran. I think you have to distinguish, in particular, with Iran from the other aspirants or the other entrants. They want to join Russia and China in a bloc that is explicitly opposed to the West. I think other countries want to increase their diplomatic freedom of action and room for maneuver, and I think that's why notions that the BRICS will become a solid, consolidated anti-Western bloc are overblown. If you just look, for instance, at the United Arab Emirates, it has U.S. military relationships. It obviously doesn't want to throw in its lot entirely with an anti-Western coalition. Another aspirant, which has said it wants to join, is Turkey, which will also be at the meeting. Turkey is, of course, a NATO member, so you can begin to see that the larger that the BRICS membership becomes, the less sort of geopolitical coherence it actually has.
So other institutions like G20, like the World Bank, they at the moment they don't have much to fear.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, one of the big fears, of course, in the West has been that the BRICS and enlarged BRICS would, in a sense, within the confines of the G20, which includes, of course, established big economies and then emerging big economies, that in some ways you would have the G7 on the one hand pitted against BRICS on the other. I think that that's really unrealistic because when you think about countries that are in the queue or already in the queue could also include Indonesia eventually. These countries have no desire to form a major counter-Western coalition. They don't want to get involved in an East-West dispute. They want to be able to pursue what India calls a multi-alignment strategy. Now, on the part of the West, that really means that there needs to be some way of not being too fearful about the BRICS, welcoming it as just one other club among many, but then also taking seriously some of the grievances that had led some of these countries to want to join the BRICS by making room for them in some of the big institutions that are supposed to govern the world.
All right, I want to bring in now Teresa Fallon. She is the founder and director of the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies in Brussels. Teresa, it's good to see you again. How would you assess the power of BRICS at this moment? I mean, are we really looking at a counterweight to Western influence?
Hello, it's great to be back. I would say that the BRICS, we're seeing some momentum growing, and it's kind of a group of the disgruntled countries that really are upset with the current international order. They see that the West is in decline, and I would say that Russia and China are kind of pushing it the most. Although the first 5 countries, BRICS, as you noted in your presentation, but this is expanded now, and because Iran is one of the new players in BRICS, everyone is really paying far more attention to it now because of the situation in the Middle East. In addition, I would say that it does pose a possible threat to Western institutions in the fact that they are working together to come up to sanction-proof themselves. This is one of the U.S.'s strengths. So they want to try to get around U.S. ability to sanction these countries. So you have Iran upset with sanctions since 2018, Russia because of the war in Ukraine, and China. This is their biggest fear, that should anything happen in tensions between the U.S. and China, that the U.S. and the West could sanction them. So they're looking at a way to get around sanctions. And the more countries in this grouping, the more likely that they will able to come up with something. Nevertheless, it's a disparate group of countries with very different national interests, and tiptoeing around some of these will be interesting to watch how the outcome. Modi, the Prime Minister of India, has some issues with China, and so not everyone is in agreement, I would say.
I'm wondering, this issue use the term sanction-proof. What does this summit tell us about the U.S.-led efforts to isolate Russia over its war in Ukraine?
Yes, we're seeing that narrative growing, especially since Russia is the host of this event in Kazan. So I think that there have been many meetings before the big shows today and over the next 2 days. So they've had a lot of bilateral meetings. And this is one of the bugbears that they have been wanting to get around, because sanctions have hurt the Russian economy. They want to come up with, and they're borrowing some very clever experiments through cryptocurrencies. There's something called mBridge, and the Bank of International Settlements has been working on this, and China has been a big player in it as well. So this could ultimately dethrone the U.S. And China has long seen the power of the U.S. is not so much militarily, but in their ability to punish countries financially. And by hoping to work with BRICS to come up with this sanction-proof regimen would be really important to them. So the other narrative I would say that's very powerful, I looked at the Chinese press on all of this. In one paragraph in People's Daily today, the word Global South was written 14 times. Wow. So they're really emphasizing that they represent the Global South and that, that they've been neglected and by the Global North, you could say. I don't really like these terms. I think they're too broad, but this is a term of art. And I would say that they're trying to show that they represent the neglected Global South and give them a voice.
What would be your recommendation then for the United States and the European Union moving forward? I mean, should they change anything vis-a-vis these countries?
Well, I would say that the geopolitical landscape looks very challenging, the most challenging period, I would say, in decades. So I think that a lot is kind of waiting to see who the new U.S. president will be. So I think there are ways that the U.S. will probably try to knock down any sort of challenger to their ability to be kind of in control of the international clearing system through central banks. Nevertheless, they might be able to take what has already been learned and speed up trades, and that way they could kind of consolidate their position. But there is a great deal of interest in ways to get around this, and technology is changing this equation. So I think that the U.S. would probably try to fight these off, but we'll see that China definitely has a great deal of interest in doing that. Also, working towards peace. The narrative of this event is, to bring peace and stability in the world. So yes, Russia has invaded Ukraine. It's been a horrific war for over 1,000 days now, but this is kind of the narrative that they're trying, and rhetoric that they're cloaking themselves in.
All right, let's talk about this. Let's go to DW's Russia analyst, Konstantin Egert. He joins us now from Vilnius. Konstantin, good to see you. So how do you think Russia might flex its diplomatic muscles as the host of this summit?
Well, it tries, rather, Brent. I think that the whole idea of the summit is to show that Vladimir Putin is, if you wish, a magnetic pole in the world to which everyone who's non-Western sort of is pulled. Russia is diplomatically isolated, and for it is very important to show that it isn't. In this respect, this is not only an event that Russia is going to try to project globally, it's also very important domestically. If you look at Russian propaganda channels everywhere, their main message is that actually the majority of the world is with us. It's only the Western golden billion, so-called golden billion, is against us. And this is one of those events which is going to be spinned to the Russians as a diplomatic success and prove that Russia actually has allies.
We know that the raison d'etre of BRICS is simply to act as a counterweight to Western influence. I'm wondering, where does BRICS stand with that role, and does it aim to achieve that now?
Well, I think it's been expanding, and we know that Iran joined, that they issued invitations to other countries, but the more it expands, the more it's complicated to say what actually BRICS is about. When 20 years it was launched, it was mostly about a role in the global economy. Now it seems, at least to Russia, from the point of view of Russia, China, Iran, this is first and foremost of all an anti-American and anti-Western bloc, which you mentioned. For others, it's a way of pulling weight, kind of increasing their impact in the world, but not so much confronting the West. For example, India, which is a very important, a founding member of BRICS, does it want to confront the West? Does it want to get into conflict with the US, for example? No, it doesn't. So I think that the idea is to expand, but with this expansion, it becomes much more difficult to pull this diplomatic weight, because these countries are very frequently, they have disagreements. Their interests sometimes go in diametrically opposed directions.
Yeah, we've got new members who've been invited to join. That includes Iran, Saudi Arabia. We understand Turkey, which is also a member of NATO, has expressed interest in joining. I'm wondering, if you're bringing all of those in, is that going to complicate the purpose of BRICS, or at least the purpose of BRICS as Vladimir Putin would like to see it?
Yes, definitely, Brad. Spot on. Saudi Arabia and Iran are regional rivals. And actually, confronting Iran or a conflict with Iran is one of the reasons we are talking now about the possibility of establishment of diplomatic ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia. You look at other aspirants and those who are interested in BRICS. I mean, let's say Ethiopia and Egypt. They have lots of bilateral problems. India and China. Well, as one colleague rightly said, most of the time they're dealing with one problem: how not to go to war with each other. So indeed, the more members are there, the more it becomes quite, I would say, watered-down club of people who generally dislike the West, but when it comes to their practical interests, are very much keen to continue interacting with it.
Yeah, that's right. It's called being very flexible with who you see as your friends and your enemies, I guess. DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Egert. As always, Konstantin, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.